Shalom, Hebrews and Hebrews. Welcome to the channel. I am Oilfield Disciple doing today's daily reading of 1 Kings chapter 11. If you are new to the channel and you've seen a few videos of content and you like them, please click the subscribe button, share these videos, and hit the little bell icon to get notified when we do new videos. Like yesterday when the wind of hail hit us and turned the sky dark. I made a video yesterday during that with a little encouraging message. At the time of making that video, I didn't know how extreme that was fixing to get. We wound up getting sustained winds of about 50 mile an hour and probably some gusts up to 65, 70 mile an hour. And of course, I was out in the middle of them sand dunes, and so it really looked apocalyptic and kind of like those pictures I used to see in the history textbooks of the old Dust Bowl back in the 30s. It was quite epic. Done a lot of damage too yesterday, and so. But with that said, let's get to reading. We got 1 Kings chapter 11 for you for us today. Camera set up there per this channel. You don't need to see my ugly mug. Get your Bibles out, follow along with me, or there's a couple old rundown beat up houses that once were someone's dwelling. And we are continuing on with the reign of Solomon, and yesterday we were looking at how prominent the reign of King Solomon was for the Israelites, but also to be on guard, not to just open yourself up for an attack, whether it be spiritual or physical. Safeguarding ourselves to not make it easy for others to take advantage of us. That's part of discernment. And so we're going to continue that on today. And like I said, I don't read ahead, and so it's new bread for me, just like it is for y'all. Every now and again I'll read ahead whenever I remember a chapter that's prominent and I need to look at a few things. I consider my Bible as my sword, and so therefore if I have a sword, I need to sharpen it. And the way I sharpen my sword is when I'm reading, when I'm doing my daily reading plan or whatnot, or if I'm just reading something to study something out and I see something of prominence, I'll underline it, highlight it, make notes next to my Bible or whatever. And this chapter is plumb full of that. I've got red underlining and yellow highlights, not many notes, but so we're going to see something. Obviously, the last time I read this chapter was very prominent, stuck out to me. And so let's see what we got for today. Chapter 11, verse 1 in 1 Kings. And King Solomon loved many foreign women, in addition to the daughter of Pharaoh, the Moabite, the Ammonite, the Edomite, the Sidonian, and Hivite women. All right, now we know that Yahweh tells us not to marry outside of the camp of Israel, for the simple fact that their traditions, their gods that many of these cultures had, rather than us leading them correctly, will cause us to begin following their traditions and lifestyles in order to please them. And that goes for several aspects. You got a buddy that, he's hooked on drugs, or he's an alcoholic, or whatever the case may be. Meet him on your terms to help him with that situation. Don't meet him on his terms, meaning don't go to the bar and hang out with him. Don't go to places of influence that will cause you to stumble, because more times than not, Someone will drag you into the mud rather than you pulling them out of the mud if you are not guarded. Not always, but most oftentimes. Just like God, Yahweh tells us, I believe it's in Jeremiah chapter 10, do not, I repeat, do not go the way of the nations when you enter into the land which I'm giving you. Don't pick up their traditions. And see, that's what today's modern cultural church has done. We have picked up the traditions along the way of many diverse cultures and then tried to entangle it with biblical culture, attach Jesus' name to it, or attach Yahweh's name to it, or whatever, and call it good. And when Yahweh says it's an abomination unto me. So Solomon has begun taking on these wives. Verse 2. From the nations of whom Yahweh had said to the children of Israel, you do not go into them, and they do not go into you, for they shall certainly turn away your hearts after their mighty ones, their idols. And Solomon clung to these in love. Clung to these in love. Jesus says that, well, actually, let's see, let me think real quick. Give me just a second, how it's exactly said. In Genesis chapter 2, and then Jesus reiterates it in Matthew, a man is to leave his father and mother and cleave unto his wife. It's like cling. It's also was clung right here. The word C-L-U-N-G, clung to these in love. To cling is to attach yourself, make it inseparable. And so Solomon has done that. Verse 3, and he had 700 wives, princes, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. All right, now wives are, the biblical model, or the biblical marriage is you create a contract. You have a contract. You draw up. All right, and that contract can look like this. You see an attractive woman or male, if you know, opposite gender, and you see they're pretty. You go and you ask them, hey, you want to go have dinner tonight? That's beginning to draw up the contract, right? Now, sealing the contract, signing the contract is when you enter into sexual relations. That's signing the contract. The biblical model is to have a contract, sign the contract, and then enter into covenant with that contract. Now, the difference in a covenant and a contract is if we sign a contract and we put these stipulations down, as long as you hold up your end of the bargain, I hold up my end of the bargain, we're good. But if you break your end of the bargain, I'm allowed to get out of that contract, and vice versa. Whereas a covenant is a little more stronger. If you break your end of the deal, I'm still to uphold my end of my word, which is why Yahweh has a covenant with us. Because whether or not we keep our end of the deal, he's keeping his end of the deal. Or if it was a contract, he could just tear up the contract when we didn't do our side of the contract, the stipulations. And so a marriage, drop the contract, you sign the contract, and then you enter into covenant. And that covenant is X, Y, and Z. What's the Bible say? Leave your father and mother and cling to your wife. Men, love your wives as Christ loved the church. Women, submit to your husbands. That's the deal of the contract. So you feel me? So this idea of premarital sex is really a false misnomer. Sex is marriage. And so, all right, so he has 700 wives. Dude, how are you going to love your wife as Christ loved the church when you have 700 different females from different cultures and backgrounds? There's no way you can keep your biblical end of this bargain. Difference between a wife and a concubine is a wife has the inheritance. A wife gets special privileges of an inheritance, whereas a concubine is more of a servant type servanthood. Now, concubine can be through sex or just that, a servant. Either way, the privileges of a concubine are less than that of a wife, yet you're still responsible for this one. Once you enter in and you sign that contract, have sex with them, you're responsible for them. Now, the covenant, that's where it changes with the concubine. There is no covenant, just a contract. Verse 4, and it came to be when Solomon was old, and that his wives had turned away his heart after their mighty ones, their idols, their traditions, and their culture. And his heart was not perfect with Yahweh, his Elohim, as was the heart of his father David. And Solomon went after Asheroth, the mighty one of the Sidonians, and after Milcom, the abomination of the Ammonites. I'm not sure about Milcom. Asheroth is that you'll hear an Asheroth tree. It's kind of like a Christmas tree. It's something. It's actually an idol of like a pyramid that they used to worship in Judges with Gideon. He went and destroyed the Asheroth altar, the altar of Asher. And like I said, Milcom, I'm not sure what Milcom, I have to look that up. Anyway, verse 6. Thus Solomon did evil in the eyes of Yahweh and did not follow Yahweh completely, like his father David. All right. Now, it wasn't that he had 700 wives that caused him to be sideways with God. What got him sideways with God is that he allowed these wives to lead him into their false idolatry, or their idolatry and their false teachings in religions and whatnot, rather than following the word of Yahweh. Verse 7. And Solomon built a high place for Chemosh, the abomination of Moab, on the hill of the east of Jerusalem, and for Molech, the abomination of the children of Ammon. And I know Molech I believe it was Molech was the god during Samson that Samson dealt with. And Molech required the sacrifice of babies according to their tradition. Verse 8, and so he did for all his foreign wives, who burned incense and slaughtered to their mighty ones. And therefore Yahweh was enraged with Solomon, because his heart had turned away from Yahweh, Elohim of Israel, who had appeared to him twice, and commanded him concerning this word, not to go after other mighty ones. But he did not guard what Yahweh had commanded. Take note of that. Highline it, underline it. He did not guard Yahweh's word. Same as today. Are we guarding Yahweh's word? Truly. I mean, are we, well, it doesn't hurt if we do this. It doesn't hurt if we celebrate this holiday or that holiday. It'll be okay. Guard the word. Verse 11. And Yahweh said to Solomon, because you have done this, and have not guarded my covenant and my laws, which I have commanded you, I shall certainly tear the rain away from you and give it to your servant. Now, that's terrible right there, to tear it away and give it to your servant. Not your son, but your servant. That means your lineage is going to lose the throne. Only I do not do it in your days, for the sake of your father David. Out of the hand of your son I shall tear it. So Solomon's lineage, his son, is going to lose the reign because of his wickedness. That our sins would visit us to the second and third generations. Verse 13. Only I shall not tear away all the reign, but give one tribe to your son for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, which I have chosen. Take note of that. Okay? One tribe. One tribe of the 12 is going to be the remnant. And that will be Yehuda. And Yahweh raised up an adversary against Solomon, Hadad the Edomite. He was the seed of the king in Edom. And it came to be when David was in Edom, and Joab, the commander of the army, had gone up to bury the slain after he had struck every male in Edom. And Joab remained there with all Israel for 6 new moons, until every male in Edom was cut off. Joab was kind of David's right-hand man, remember? And so he stayed there to make sure that Edom did not rise up against them again. Verse 17. And Hadad fled to go to Egypt, he and certain Edomites of his father's servants with him, while Hadad was still a little child. And they arose from Midian and came to Paran, and took men with them from Paran, and came to Mitzrayim, to Egypt, to Pharaoh, king of Egypt, who gave him a house and ordered food for him and gave him land. And Hadad found much favor in the eyes of Pharaoh, so that he gave him as wife the sister of his own wife, the sister of sovereigness Tahpenes. And the sister of Tahpenes bore him Genubath his son, who Tahpenes weaned in Pharaoh's house. And Genubath was in the house of Pharaoh among the sons of Pharaoh. And Hadad heard in Mitzrayim that David slept with his fathers, and that Joab, the commander of the army, was dead. And Hadad said to Pharaoh, let me go to my land. And so Hadad, being a little child, being sent to Egypt for protection, winds up growing up in the house of Pharaoh, winds up marrying Pharaoh's sister-in-law, becoming prominent. And now he hears David's gone. And it's time to go get revenge. Yahweh raised this up. This is by no happenstance. Verse 22, and Pharaoh said to him, but what have you lacked with me, that you are now seeking to go to your own land? And he answered, no, but please let me go. In other words, I lack nothing, but I got some unfinished business to go take care of. And Elohim raised up another adversary against him, Rezon, son of Eliada, whom had fled from his master, Hadadezer, king of Soba, and gathered men to him and became commander over a raiding band when David killed those of Soba. And they went to Damascus and dwelt there and reigned in Damascus. And he was an adversary of Israel all the days of Solomon, besides the trouble that Hadad had caused. And he was hostile to Israel and reigned over Aram. So early on, when Solomon's following Yahweh and keeping his statutes, commands, and laws, and he's doing what Yahweh said, there was none to come against Solomon. There was no adversaries for Solomon and all of Israel. But when he goes sideways, here comes the enemies. And that's part of Yahweh's judgment on a nation or a house or whatever the case may be, that he would bring in a nation more wicked than you to humble you, to bring you back to God. Verse 26. And a servant of Solomon, Jeroboam, son of Nebat, an Ephraimite from Siridaia, whose mother's name was Sarua, a widow, also lifted up a hand against the king. Now, an Ephraimite remember, comes from that of Ephraim, the one that Jacob blessed, of the son of Joseph, of the two sons of Joseph that were born in Egypt. And from Ephraim comes many of us who are Gentiles, who are grafted in and become adopted back into the house of Israel. Verse 27. And this is what caused him to lift up a hand against the king. Solomon had built Milo, repairing the breaks in the city of David his father. And the man, Jeroboam, was a brave man. And Solomon, seeing that the young man was doing his work well, made him the officer over the compulsory labor of the house of Joseph. And it came to be at that time, when Jeroboam went out of Jerusalem, that the prophet Ahijah the Shilonite met him on the way, and he was wearing a new garment, and the two were alone in the field. And Ahijah took hold of the new garment that was on him and tore it in 12 pieces, and said to Jeroboam, Take for yourself 10 pieces, for thus saith Yahweh, the Elohim of Israel, I am tearing the reign out of the hand of Solomon, and shall give 10 tribes to you. That will be the 10 northern tribes of the kingdom of Israel, which will be scattered throughout the 4 corners of the earth. The only house of Judah, which actually consists of 2 tribes, Benjamin and Judah, will be the only remnant that continues through the ages, just like we just read over there. I will tear the reign and give you 1 tribe to your son for the sake of David. Okay, we read that in verse 13. See, that's why we have to understand the 2 tribes, or the 2 houses of Israel. We have to get this, or we're going to be stumbling and not understanding most of the Bible. Nor will we understand most of God's judgments and blessings. Verse 32, But he shall have 1 tribe for the sake of my servant David, and for the sake of Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen out of all the tribes of Israel, because they have forsaken me, and they bow themselves to Asheroth, the mighty one of the Sidonians, to Chemosh, the mighty one of the Moabites, Milcom, the mighty one of the children of Ammon, and they have not walked in my ways, to do what is right in my eyes, and my laws and my right rulings, as did his father David. But I do not take all the reign from his hand, because I have made him ruler over all the days of his life, for the sake of my servant David, whom I chose, because he guarded my commands and my laws. And I shall take the reign out of his son's hand and give it to you, the 10 tribes. And to his son I give 1 tribe, so that my servant David shall always have a lamp before me in Jerusalem, the city which I have chosen for myself to put my name there. So I take you, and you shall reign over all that your being desires, and you shall be king over Israel. Okay? King over Israel. That's not all Israel. That's the house of Israel, the 10 northern tribes. And it shall be, if you obey all that I command you, and walk in my ways, and do what is right in my eyes, to guard my laws, my commands, as my servant David did, then I shall be with you, and build for you a steadfast house, as I built for David, and I shall give Israel to you. And because of this, I humble the seed of David, but not forever. And Solomon sought to kill Jeroboam, but Jeroboam rose up and fled to Egypt, to Shishak, king of Egypt, and was in Egypt until the death of Solomon. And the rest of the acts of Solomon, all that he did, and his wisdom, are they not written in the book of Acts of Solomon? Interesting. I wonder where that book might be. A lot of times it will make mention of, is it not written in the book of Chronicles? Verse 42.
And the days of Solomon reigned in Jerusalem over all Israel 40 years. And so Solomon slept with his fathers and was buried in the city of David, his father. And Rehoboam, his son, reigned in his place. All right. So, understanding the two houses, understanding that when it says reigned over all Israel, that's the house of Judah and the house of Israel. When it says reigned over Israel, that's just the house of Israel. That's the 10 northern tribes. And that's all the tribes minus Judah and Benjamin. And Ephraim and Manasseh are the two sons of Joseph. And so, look into that and see that, because when you go reading Revelation, the names of the tribes, when it says that there's 12,000 from each of these tribes, there's a name. Actually, I think there is two names in Revelation of the original 12 named tribes that are replaced, that are not named there. And so it's an interesting study, and it's been a while, so I'm not going to lead you astray, but just go look at the 12 tribes of Israel that are named now in this time frame for 1 Kings versus go read Revelation and what those 12 tribes names were, and it'll lead you on a nice study. One of these days I'm going to get the blackboard or the dry erase board, and we're going to go through it real extensively. So anyway, I hope this blessed you, encouraged you, even frustrates you. Go look this up. This is some interesting stuff, and you've got to see it for yourself to understand how we, Gentiles, are grafted into the house of Israel, God's chosen people. It's only Israel that are Yahweh's chosen. So, y'all be blessed. Be encouraged. I will catch y'all on the next ride.